Hey folks, thanks for clicking the button and watching this. I hope you watched the whole video. I know it's like almost 15 minutes long, but there's a lot of information in it. I try to get it in fast. I want to talk about the bonfire October 31st. I don't think there was a bonfire behind Stephen's garage on October 31st. The county needs a bonfire to be there because they found those bones back there, supposedly. I think they brought the bones there in the box already, in my opinion. I don't think they were ever dug out. I think they brought them and then they said they dug them out. But I'm going to read some interviews by detectives. The state built a case where there was a bonfire, and that's where they disposed of the victim. So please watch this entire video and follow along. But I don't think there was a bonfire, and if there wasn't a bonfire, then we know that the county planted those bones, in my opinion. So thanks for watching. Here we go. By the way, I go by Clash or Johnny Jack. So if you want to yell at your screen, just say, "Shut up, Clash!" Okay, anyway, this is the first interview that I'm going to talk about, and it was the second interview they did with Stephen Avery that I have as a written report. This was on November 6th. They interviewed him on November 5th as well. The detectives did. But the interview on November 5th just talked about what happened while she was there, while Teresa was there. Did she go into his house and things like that. But what I want to talk about is the bonfire. Now, here's the interview November 6th. And this is what Stephen said about the bonfire on October 31st when they interviewed him on November 6th. That's right. They didn't say anything about the bonfire. Stephen didn't, nor did the detectives, because there probably wasn't one. So anyway, they asked him what he did Monday after Teresa left. He says that he went by his sister's house to see if Bobby was there. Bobby wasn't there. So he went back home. His mom might have stopped by and dropped the mail off to his place. And then he said he listened to a stereo, not leaving his place until around supper time. He says that he was uncertain, but he could have gone to eat at his mom's house, which he did a lot in the evenings. He'd eat at his mom's house. Excuse me. And then he said if he did eat supper, that he would have returned home to wait on a phone call from Jody. If you've watched the documentary, you know that she did call his place October 31st 2 times because she shows the phone records where she called around 7 o'clock, and then the second time I think it was around 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock. Anyway, he says that he went back and received 2 phone calls, but he could not recall the times when that happened. He said he couldn't recall who would have eaten at his mother's on Monday. He didn't know if Chucky was there or not, but knew that his mom was. Okay, that's it for the interview as far as that evening. Later in the interview, they also asked him about burn barrels, and he said he hadn't burned anything in 2 weeks. This is November 6th during the interview, so it would have been a week before October 31st. So he says he hadn't burned anything in the burn barrels. Nothing had been burned. So the first interview that I have that I'm talking about is with Stephen Avery. He doesn't say anything about a bonfire on Monday evening, the 31st. Now I'm going to pull up someone else's interview that they did. Bear with me. I'll be right back. Won't take long. Okay, once again, I'm back. We're still talking about the bonfire. This interview is with Blaine Dassey on November 7th. They've talked to Stephen. He didn't say anything about a bonfire on October 31st. All right. They asked Blaine what he did on October 31st. Tell him about his day. He says he got up at 6:30 like he normally does. He went to school. Says school gets out at 3:05. The bus gets him home, drops him off between 3:30 and 4 o'clock. He says that they walked to their house, Blaine and Brendan. Blaine says he didn't talk to anybody except Brendan on the way to the house. When they got to the house, Bobby was sleeping, and when they came in, it woke Bobby up. Blaine says he received a phone call around 5 o'clock that evening from his friend Jason. I'll skip over this because what we're looking for is the bonfire. But what ended up happening is Jason invites Blaine over to his house for trick-or-treating. So Jason's mom comes and picks up Blaine around 5:20. They go to Jason's, they eat dinner, and they go trick-or-treating. The detectives also asked Blaine if anything happened between 3:30 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Blaine says it did not. Also, if you want to go read these interviews, just search. You can Google, Bing, Yahoo, whatever it is you do. Search Blaine Dassey interview November 7th. And then for Stephen's interview, just search Stephen Avery interview November 6th. There's a YouTube video of Stephen's interview, but it's like an hour and 13 minutes long or something. It's pretty long. But if you want to read this stuff, you can. The written reports are condensed, so they're not as long. Okay, so Blaine says nothing happened between 3:30 and 5 o'clock. He goes to his buddy's house for dinner, and then they go trick-or-treating. Now, here's where you need to pay attention. If you zoned off, listen to this part, please. Blaine says, when Blaine returned from trick-or-treating, he did not see anyone outside. Blaine stated when he got home, Brendan, Barb, and Bobby were inside and everyone was still awake. Shortly after Blaine got home, between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, Blaine said he went to bed. Blaine was asked if he recalled anything unusual happening after he went to bed that evening, and he said no, he did not. He says that he estimated that he got home from trick-or-treating around 9:30 that evening. So, October 31st, 9:30 in the evening, this is when Stephen and Brendan are supposed to be up to no good, right? Having this big bonfire. But Blaine says he got home and Brendan, Barb, and Bobby were inside at 9:30. They also asked if he'd recall anyone using burn barrels that day. Now, we know Blaine was only home between like 3:30 and 5 o'clock and then around 9:30. But he says no, he did not recall anyone using the burn barrels that day. So, anyway, so there's no talk of a bonfire from Blaine, who gets home at 9:30 on that Monday evening. Now, there was also an interview with Brendan, but they only interviewed him about getting off the bus, and then he said he looked out the kitchen window and saw Teresa and Stephen talking, and she was taking pictures. Now, I'm going to go to November 10th. This is someone else, and Brendan didn't mention about a bonfire in his interview with the detectives either. All right, on November 10th, this one's important. Scott Taddick is questioned by the detectives. They go to his work, and here's what he says. Actually, they meet at a restaurant. I'm sorry. They ask him about his day on October 31st, and here's what he says. Please pay attention, because this is so important, because we're looking for a bonfire on October 31st. Okay. He says that on October 31st, he didn't go to that work. What? He said he didn't go to work that day. Okay, remember this. On October 31st, he didn't go to work that day because his mother was in the hospital in Green Bay. He says he drove to Green Bay and checked on his mother at the hospital. And he says he left the hospital at about 2:15 and arrived home at 3:15. Taddick stated that he got all of his hunting stuff together and loaded it in his vehicle. Talks about what kind of vehicle it was. Backed out of his driveway and went westbound on 147. He also stated when he was driving westbound, he saw a black Blazer. That was Bobby. Said Bobby was going hunting too. Blah, blah, blah. He says as he was driving by Bobby, they waved at each other. He said this was around 3:10 p.m. Anyway, I'm still looking for a bonfire. All right, so Scott says he hunted between 3:30 and 5 o'clock, and then when he got done hunting, he had 2 messages on his phone. One was from Barb, and she wanted to go see his mom. So Scott says he went to Barbara's house to pick her up and take her to see his mother in Green Bay. When he arrived, he says, when he arrived at Barbara's house, she was standing outside with Stephen Avery and one of her younger sons. Taddick said he didn't know the boy's name, but he was one of the young kids. Scott stated that Barbara got into his truck and they drove to the hospital where his mom was and stayed there for about an hour, and then they drove back and he got her home around 7:30 to 7:45. Now, he says that he got home around 8 o'clock. Then he says at around 9 o'clock, Barb drove out to his house to visit and stayed there until 11 or 12. They asked if Barb was acting okay, and he said, yeah, she was acting just fine. So here you have Scott says that Barb came to his place around 9 o'clock, but Blaine says Barb was home around 9:30 when he got home. Also, when Scott goes to pick her up around 7:30 to 7:45, and she was outside talking to Stephen, one of the young sons, he doesn't say anything about a bonfire. So we've got Stephen, Blaine, and Scott have all been interviewed about the 31st. Nobody says anything about a bonfire, and he says that Barb's outside talking to Stephen. Where's this bonfire at? Nobody's talking about a bonfire. There is no bonfire on October 31st. These people have been interviewed, and there's no bonfire. Now I'm going to pull up something else, and I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere, because this is where things start to get a little goofy. Okay, folks, so this is where I need your help, because I need to figure out what happened here. This is an interview with Scott. Second interview they did with him on November 29th. At this point, we're 3 weeks later. They found bones and all this stuff. But so far in these early interviews, before the 8th, before the bones were found, there is no talk of a bonfire. Now, the county has their story together. They've planted these bones, in my opinion, and they need someone to say, hey, there was a bonfire. So who do they use? Someone that they have something on. They've got something on somebody, but I think it's Scott. So November 29th, 3 weeks after the first interview, they interview Scott again. They advise him that they want to go over his activities in the afternoon and evening of October 31st. This is what he says. Tadek says after work that day, after work, in the interview before, he said he didn't go to work. So now he's making up a story. Now he's lying, because he says after work that day, he arrived home around 3:15. Earlier he said he went to go see his mom. So he says he arrived home after work. He went hunting. We know he went hunting. That was the story before. From 3:35, he says he passed Bobby on the highway. We know that part's true. Then he says he arrived to Barb's. He goes to Barb to pick up Barb so he can take her to see his mom. He says he got there between 5:15 and 5:30. He didn't get out of his vehicle, but he did observe Stephen Avery and one of Barb's sons standing outside behind Stephen's garage. He could not identify which son, but could tell it was one of her boys. Tadek says these two were standing around a fire that was burning behind Stephen's garage. He said Barb then came out of the house and they drove to Green Bay. Now before, he says Barb was outside talking to Stephen and he didn't say anything about a fire. See, now she's in the house. So someone pulled Scott to the side between his first interview and this one, said this is the story, this is what you're going to say, or in my opinion, we're going to charge you with murder because you don't have an alibi, and the only alibi you have is Bobby, so we're going to charge the both of you with a crime, with maybe murder. So they want Stephen in jail because he's the one suing them. So what they do is tell Scott, you're going to make up this story about this bonfire because we have to have the bonfire because that's where these bones were. So they told Scott, this is your story. But what Scott didn't know is that he's not smart enough to keep the same story. So he said after work, when he didn't go to work that day. So he's already lied. And he's lying about this bonfire. And then he says when he got home from the hospital that night, he says he dropped Barb off again. He again observed two people standing by the fire behind Stephen's garage. He said it looked like the same two people from before, but because it was dark out, he could not determine for sure. But it looked like the same two people because of their shapes and sizes. Someone please help me. Please tell me. Please tell me what they had. Did they threaten Scott with murder and told him you come up with this story? Because before there was no mention of a bonfire. And then in the third interview, if you want to read his third interview, which is like 3 months later after this, he changes the story again. It's then a big bonfire. And I don't have time in this video to go over that, but if you read his third interview, he says it's a big bonfire. And he says Barbara spent the night with him that night when Blaine said she was home. So his lies became bigger and bigger because he couldn't keep up with the truth. But the truth was the first one, he didn't go to work. He went to his grandma's, but he had to make up a story for this fire. And when he did, he messed up his whole story. So anyway, thanks for watching. I have some bloopers that I'm going to add at the end of this. And please comment and tell me what did they have on Scott to make him say there was a fire when there was not a fire there.